Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the afternoon session of the Institute on National Affairs Symposium on American Humor. I see a lot of faces out there who I know. If I haven't had a chance to meet you, my name is Walter Harrison. I teach writing in the English department here. Before we begin, I want to clear up something about this evening's session. In the ad today in the Daily, page 13, it announces tonight's speaker, Brendan Gill, but it doesn't tell you where he's speaking. So lest you not wander around the Union for hours looking for Brendan Gill, he'll be in the Sunroom at 8 p.m. Having performed my corrective function, I will now continue. With me up here is Norris Yates, who is professor of English in our English department. He's a long time, may I say that, critic and chronicler of American humor, the author of 3 books, William T. Porter and the Spirit of the Times, The American Humorist Conscience of the 20th Century, and a volume on Robert Benchley in Twain's United States Authors series. In contrast to Professor Yates' long and illustrious career, my career is just beginning. All of my books are piled on that empty table in the back, and there's not much to say about myself. I do want to tell you a little bit about what we're going to try to do today. We see ourselves as preparing you for Brendan Gill's appearance tonight, and I at least have been cognizant of Mr. Gill's warning to us. He's talking about what college professors like to do at speeches, and he says, college professors like a talk to last at least an hour, with everything being said at least 3 times. The third time they hear a thing, the professors feel that famous shock of recognition, and a pleased smile begins to play over their faces. So we're going to try not to last an hour, not to say anything more than once, and hopefully you'll still be able to recognize some sense to what we're saying.
We may smile or we may not smile.
Well, so that's it. We expect simply to discuss things. Professor Yates told me we will pretend we're talking to each other and you can just overhear what we have to say. I think maybe we should try to explain what we mean by the title, Magazines and the Revitalization of American Humor. Would you like to explain that?
Well, I would, if I could, but I really have no idea what the title means. Maybe a meaning will organically evolve as we continue the conversation. The magazines from colonial times were one of the chief vehicles of humor, and most of my own work, it's not too much of an exaggeration to say that has been spent in going over old magazines of one kind or another. And I had gotten interested in early 19th century magazines. I started studying the career of William T. Porter, who was the editor of a sporting magazine, a pioneer of journalism in founding the first sporting magazine that had a national rather than a regional approach. Now, the main sports, he started this in 1830. It lasted until the Civil War killed it. The main sports, organized sports at the time, were horse racing and hunting. And so the magazine drew a great many subscribers from the frontier and from the less sparsely populated regions of the East. And he developed a large crew of stringers, part-time correspondents, to give him the results of horse races. This was how he started appealing to a national public, to try to make his magazine a compendium of horse racing results with accurate times, so that the gamblers and the fans could judge the performance of various horses. And for this, he had to depend on horse racing buffs in those areas where horse racing was most popular. The New York area where the magazine was published was one such, but the others were centers of horse racing were out on the Mississippi frontier and in the South, and his amateur reporters included people from many walks of life: plantation owners, frontier doctors, lawyers, army officers. All of them sharing an interest in racing and hunting, but some of them began to include humorous sketches of local characters and narratives of exciting events and of tall tales and folklore, and he encouraged that. And in time, the magazine became a sort of repository of humor from all parts of the frontier. I emphasized the southern and western frontier. Somebody else did a dissertation on his Porter's use of humor from the Old Northwest. Gradually, a number of people dropped racing entirely and concentrated on sending in character sketches and tall tales, and nearly all of them humorous for one reason or another. And the other magazines borrowed them. The very respectable Knickerbocker magazine borrowed a number of the humorous stuff from Porter's magazine, and he also borrowed from newspapers, local newspapers, which were also very important. And in those easy days of no copyright, pirating was frequent. Which made it easier, really, for a local newspaper to pick up something clever from a local correspondent and send it to the Spirit of the Times, where it would then be probably copied by half a dozen other magazines. Porter eventually published 2 volumes of the humor printed in his magazine, and several of his contributors went on to publish volumes of their own. And by the time the Civil War killed the magazine, because a good many of his customers were in the South, and there was a certain amount of difficulty in getting the magazine to them after the Civil War broke out. By that time, magazines like the Knickerbocker, as I said, and the North American Review, and the Century were publishing humorous as well as solemn, stuffy material. To put it more literarily, the humorous informal essay had established a firm foothold in magazines by that time.
Can we say something about the tall tale? What makes a tall tale funny? I'd like to know.
Well, one working definition of a tall tale is either a preposterous narrative reinforced by realistic detail, or a realistic narrative embellished with preposterous detail. One brief example, which occurs in the story of The Big Bear of Arkansas by T.B. Thorpe, which is one of the best-known tales turned into Porter's magazine. Concern a character who tells a tall tale about an unhuntable bear that essentially died when its time came, but he throws in other comments about the ferocity of Arkansas mosquitoes, for example, and the fact that if you the fertility of the soil, you drop in a few seeds of corn, and then you better step back quick, because otherwise you'll be hit as the plant rises. Another tall tale involving mosquitoes, which was not in The Big Bear of Arkansas, but circulated widely. A man hears 2 mosquitoes coming at him. He crawls into a barrel. the mosquitoes argue, shall we eat him here or take him away? And they said, let's eat him here. If we don't, why, the big ones will take him away from us. A later example, of course, are the Paul Bunyan series of tall tales, in which Babe the Blue Ox is supposed to be so big that he measures 42 axe handles and a plug of starch chewing tobacco between the horns. You see the precision of detail. Well, this is taking us away from magazines because Paul Bunyan originated as an advertising brochure.
Oh, I didn't know that. There was no Paul Bunyan, oral tradition of Paul Bunyan?
There was Franklin J. Mine, who was one of the most assiduous collectors of Southwestern humor, collected a couple of very brief tales about Paul Bunyan referred to in local Michigan newspapers. Beyond that, there's no record of any folklore tradition of Paul Bunyan. But the advertising manager of the Red River Lumber Company, when that company moved from Michigan to Northern California, invented the character Paul Bunyan and made up a series of Paul Bunyan stories to popularize the image of the company. These caught on, and loggers read them and began to tell them. So it's an interesting example of a tall tale originating as an advertising trick and going from print into word-of-mouth circulation, which is word of mouth, what they call oral transmission, sounds like a car part, is supposed to be one criteria of folklore. But in this case, Paul Bunyan started in print. Started as a way to make some money and as goodwill advertising.
And what period is this?
That happened around 1910. During the big shift from when the lumber industry was in the course of shifting from the old Northwest to the new Northwest, having degutted the best timber of the old Northwest.
The old Northwest refers to Ohio, Indiana, Michigan,
And Wisconsin in particular. You know, those were the big lumber
Hey,
states.
Fritz.
He's not here. Maybe that's Paul himself.
It could be. It's been incarnated. Well, anyhow, from time to time in the late 19th century, there were a series of offbeat magazines that, usually with short lives, you might say there was a magazine counterculture going on at least as early as the 1890s, and it was the source of much humor, which would later be reprinted in the collected works of various authors. One delightful example was The Lark. The Lark was published for 2 years in San Francisco, 1895-97, by Gillette Burgess and a group of friends. And one of its purposes was just to make fun of the pretensions of graphic art, particularly Art Nouveau, the Aubrey Beardsley thin, willowy, flat-chested virgins and all the scroll work and curlicues. Burgess wrote his famous Purple Cow verse as a satire of the arbitrary use of color by the Art Nouveau people. And the page of The Lark in which that verse is printed is embroidered by a very elaborate Art Nouveau sort of border of curlicues and scroll work and hatch marks. And in context, that's very clearly what it is. The people who used green skies and blue windows and red grass, well, he says, I never saw a purple cow, and so on. In the same issue, another Burgess drawing, if I had a blackboard, I'd use it, shows a wagon viewed from an angle so the wheels are elliptical. And Burgess has a limerick under this. How marvelous truly is art. See, elliptical wheels on the cart. They look very fair in the picture up there, but imagine the ride when you start. He stopped the magazine because he ran out of funds, really, but the reason he gave was that they wanted to stop while they were still happy and fresh and full of the will to satire. But that was just one of a number of such magazines, one that I happen to have seen.
This was in San Francisco?
I was in San Francisco in 1895, 97. Now, the 97, this is a pure coincidence, I suppose, was the year that Cyrus Curtis bought the rights to the old Saturday Evening Post and hired George H. Lorimer as its editor. And the Post then was from then until at least the 1950s, was a leading source of humorous material. They had a short section called postscripts for very brief stuff, but a good deal of their fiction was humorous. Ring Lardner and Scott Fitzgerald, who, among other things, is a great satirist, were two of their most popular and highest paid writers for a number of years, along with less exalted, less quality stuff like the stories of Octavius Roy Cohen about stereotyped comic stage Negroes. But the Post was an important repository of humor, and so were the magazines Life, Judge, and Puck at the beginning of the 20th century. And they were primarily devoted to humor, but they were mass circulation magazines too. And my studies eventually especially got me into reading the old Life, which also published a number of writers that, like Benchley, later wrote for the New Yorker. Life conked out in the early 30s, and when Henry Luce wanted to start a magazine, he thought enough of the reputation of the old Life to pay, I've forgotten the sum, but a very large sum just for the rights to use the name. The old Life also had a great deal of graphic art in it by people who later wrote for the New Yorker, and so did Puck and Judge. In fact, the late S.J. Perelman wrote some of his earliest material as very brief one-liners and one-paragraph pieces for Judge.
One of your arguments in your book is that the New Yorker, as if I remember correctly, didn't start the whole tradition of the small humorous essay, that it simply accelerated what was already in existence. Is that right? Yes. In the 19aughts and 19-teens, more important than magazines for the perpetual revitalization of American humor, shall we say, was the personal column of newspapers. And through the personal column, people like Clarence Day and Don Marquis and Franklin P. Adams, and Benchley too, and H.L. Mencken, essentially freshened up the informal essay. They took it out of they got away from the cracker box tradition of the hayseed Abe Martin type philosopher spouting wise saws, playing the wise fool at the crossroads store, and put it into the framework of the short story or the informal essay, and thereby taking a lot of the tendency towards stuffiness and gentility out of the essay tradition. And all of these writers were around then when Harold Ross founded his magazine with a metropolitan interest. And there was a public there, and the talent was there. I think it's not a coincidence that Time, the American Mercury, the Dial, and the New Yorker were all founded at approximately the same time. Mencken, H.L. Mencken and Nathan had sold out the Smart Set, which was, along with Vanity Fair, were predecessors of the New Yorker in trying to encourage sophisticated humor. And the American Mercury started publication in 1924 under the auspices of Alfred A. Knopf. I had a chance once to get a 5-year file of the first 5 years of the American Mercury just for the trouble of hauling it out of somebody's attic. I'll read you a portion of their first editorial in their first issue. There is no middle ground of consolation for men who believe neither in the socialist fol-de-rol nor in the principal enemies of the socialist fol-de-rol, and yet it must be obvious that such men constitute the most intelligent and valuable body of citizens that the nation can boast.
The leading men of science and learning are in it. The best artists in all the arts are in it. Such men of business as have got any imagination are in it. It will be the design of the American Mercury to bring, if not alleviation of their lot, then at least some solace to these outcasts of democracy. That they will ever actually escape from the morass in which they now wander so disconsolately is probably too much to hope. But at all events, there is some chance of entertaining them to their taste while they flounder. We are writing for the enlightened minority, he says, somewhat inconsistently calling him later on what William Graham Sumner called the forgotten man, the enlightened, well-disposed citizen who pays his debts and his taxes and cares about things. I think you said you brought along a copy of the prospectus of the New Yorker, which appeared in February of 1925.
What year was that?
This is January 1924.
Oh, it's remarkably similar. Well, now you'll hear me read this. The New Yorker will be, this is from the prospectus, the plan of what Harold Ross, when he started the New Yorker, was going to do. The New Yorker will be a reflection in word and picture of metropolitan life. Its general tenor will be one of gaiety, wit, and satire, but it will be more than a jester. It will not be what is commonly called radical or highbrow. It will be what is commonly called sophisticated, in that it will assume a reasonable degree of enlightenment on the part of its readers. It will hate bunk. Its integrity will be above suspicion. It hopes to be so entertaining and informative as to be a necessity for the person who knows his way about or wants to. Then, of course, the famous line, which is always repeated when speaking of the New Yorker, particularly in Iowa, the New Yorker will be the magazine which is not edited for the old lady in Dubuque. It will not be concerned in what she is thinking about. It expects a considerable national circulation, but this will come from persons who have a metropolitan interest. A gauge of the metropolitan interest of Iowa State University is there are 2 copies for sale in the bookstore downstairs. I just checked.
Every once in a while, somebody checks up on the circulation in Dubuque. The last time I saw a newspaper item on that 2 or 3 years ago, there were 14 subscribers to the New Yorker in Dubuque.
No one checked age or gender, I think.
Or whether they were libraries and schools. Well, both of them, both magazines then make claims to sophistication and and to quality. The Time was founded in 1923, and with the idea of pepping up journalistic prose. And after the New Yorker came out, in one of his editorials, Henry Luce wrote that we are writing for the little old lady in Dubuque. But the Time prospectus included a statement that we want to get as much off the page and into the minds of the busy people who run while they read. To some extent, one can still see that intention. And in their earlier years, they tended to be a good deal feistier than they are now. They developed the famous or infamous Time style, however you want to look at it. But there was a good deal of anonymous humor in the magazine. For instance, in 1930, they did a cover story on Al Capone, which is anonymous, but it's a masterpiece of satire. They're presenting him as a typical big businessman who has made it. With most of the satire being directed at the adoring mob, at the number of people who seemed to be impressed and were for him. For a different audience, aiming for a mass audience, the Time also was participating, reaping the benefits of in a way, of these earlier writers that had been writing lively, brilliant humor for the pre-New Yorker magazines.
The interesting pretension, I don't want to use that word in a negative sense, but the sophistication in metropolitan life is, to me, has always been that Ross himself was born and raised in Aspen, Colorado, which at the turn of the century or earlier was hardly any more sophisticated than Dubuque. Nevertheless, and James Thurber, one of their most famous wits, came from Columbus, Ohio, which I can tell you from personal experience is no more sophisticated than Dubuque. even today. So it was clearly something that they aspired to themselves, I guess.
Yes, of course, Ross, having come from a small town, and Thurber also from a relatively small place, in a way, made them typical of New Yorkers. A great many people in New York then and at any given time came from somewhere else. Perhaps this heightened Ross's desire to cultivate what he calls a metropolitan interest and simultaneously a national audience.
Can we say something about the style of the New Yorker as opposed to the style of, say, the Spirit of the Times?
It's very hard to generalize because I find myself immediately thinking that the opposite is true. Understatement is supposed to be characteristic of trends in writing in the New Yorker. I hesitate to say the New Yorker school of writers. There is no such school of writers. But then you could say the same thing about overstatement. I mean, some of the funniest humor of Benchley, Thurber, and Perelman, to name three of the best known, is wild exaggeration. It's sometimes in the best tall tale tradition. The style was probably set as much by E.B. White and by Thurber as by anyone else. A style, if there is such a style, set in the many, many years in which they edited Talk of the Town, and either one or the other of them wrote the notes and comments part of Talk of the Town. Informal, suave, with sort of the atmosphere of a high-level conversation, but with an emphasis on wit and humor and casualness, the extensive use of vocabulary that would be available to really to the college-educated, frequent but not obtrusive use of the first-person narrator. Those would be some of the things that would be true of the Talk of the Town style.
New Yorker is also known for its cartoons, of course.
Yes.
Which are rather different. I was thinking last night when listening to Mike Peters talk that his approach to cartooning is probably exactly the opposite of what the average New Yorker cartoonist thinks of. He claimed his intention is to make people mad first and then to make them laugh. And the New Yorker, I don't think, attempts ever to anger the people who laugh at its cartoons simply to get a sort of smile of recognition, maybe.
Well, perhaps. They fell under some criticism of which Ross himself was acutely conscious for tending to be superficial and avoiding heavy political and social issues. Ross is quoted by Thurber as saying, "My God, we're in a plush-lined rut." But during the Vietnam War, William Shawn, in a famous editorial, and I think it was 1868, announced a broadening of the horizon to include issues like the war and international politics. But this did not, as far as I can see, mean a change in style. Another characteristic of the New Yorker has been the long research article, sometimes in two parts, and very often subsequently published as a book. Thurber himself claimed to have originated that idea, claims to have planted that idea in Ross's brain. And in The Beast in Me is reprinted Thurber's own first effort, which is a very satirical and informative study of the soap opera, then of course confined to radio. I can't think of the exact title, but it's kind of long. Rensselaerville, Annisonburg, Crisco Corners, some other town. That feature of the New Yorker, the informally written research article, or book really, substantial but liberally laced with humor, remains a staple of the magazine. Also remaining standard is the goings-on about town section, which includes very brief, witty comments about shows and plays and restaurants. And this has been copied shamelessly in Playboy After Dark, and also by Arnold Gingrich when he founded Esquire. So the New Yorker influence has made waves. It's extended in ripples of several kinds.
Can we consider Playboy a humorous magazine?
Well, as Donald Call once said, it's a skin magazine, and they've got the money and to buy first-class talent, and they do, and they get first-class humorous fiction and serious fiction, and some pretty good cartoons. Although I think the New Yorker, as far as consistent quality in cartoons, is still champion.
I do think it goes back to that line from their prospectus about it hopes to be so entertaining and informative as to be a necessity for the person who knows his way about or wants to. That strikes me as the same stimulus for the, what's it called, Playboy After Dark, or the Playboy Advisor, or whatever, as it does for the New Yorker's Guide to Plays in Restaurants and Nightclubs in there.
The New Yorker received some sort of a challenge, I guess you could call it that, from Tom Wolfe let's see, I had to write down the title to make sure I get it. In April 1965, in the New York Herald Tribune, he wrote a satirical essay about the New Yorker entitled "Tiny Mummies, the True Story of the Ruler of 43rd Street's Land of the Walking Dead." The New Yorker is published on offices are on 43rd Street. He himself, in his introduction to his collection of stuff, the New Journalism, he said that it was intended to be lighthearted and sportive, but the people at the New Yorker didn't think it so. In fact, they in my opinion, they overreacted. The proper thing would have been to ignore it, but they made at least one angry reply, which made them look as if they couldn't take a joke on themselves. But Wolfe, in the introduction to that collection of essays, describes how he and Jimmy Breslin and Gay Talese were trying to put more pep and ginger into their reporting, and to getting also more humor and satire into the pieces they were doing for the Herald Tribune, and also for the New York Magazine, which was then a Sunday supplement. And outlandish phrases, and with strings of letters that are supposed to represent screams and so forth. The typical Wolfe piece for Esquire was "There she goes, varoom, varoom, that candy-colored tangerine streaked flaked streamlined baby." The title was abbreviated somewhat to become the title of his first book. And it looked as if Breslin and Talese, for a while at least, and Joan Didion and Hunter Thompson and other people represented in that collection were trying to do something different from what the New Yorker was doing. I'm not so sure in the long run that it is all that different, but in any case, it made Esquire another mass circulation magazine that contributes importantly again to the perpetual refreshment of American humor. There are also, again, there continue to be offbeat little magazines, some of them counterculture and some not, that live short lives and function in a way similar to the way the so-called little magazines function in general. The editors and publishers read the stories and poems in the little literary magazines, and from time to time will tap that medium for and republish something that they think was pretty good. One example of one of these offbeat magazines was Grump. This was founded, it lasted about 2 years, founded in 1964 by a number of people connected with TV and with the movies. As a more free channel of expression for their talent. What I have here is their first anniversary issue, entitled The Best of Grump, edited by Roger Price, featuring Don Adams, Steve Allen, Isaac Asimov, Shelley Berman, Al Capp, and Henry Morgan. Judith Raskow also has a piece in there, and I believe she now writes for the New Yorker. Judith Sands, another talented woman writer, wrote for Grump. It didn't last long, but there have been a number of such magazines.
Of course, there's also the tradition of college humor magazines.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The most famous being, I guess, the Harvard Lampoon, whose editors left about 10 years ago to form what most of you know as the National Lampoon, who consequently lost some of its editors who went off to start Saturday Night Live. So they're all in some ways incestuous, I suppose, at least ancestral. It's the same kind of humor, I guess. I was going to go on a rampage about the decline of the National Lampoon as a magazine. I noticed that recently they have published, although I haven't been able to find it names yet, a book, the best of the first 10 years of the National Lampoon. I'm anxious to see it. I think it will bear out my impression that their humor has not sustained the high levels at which it started. I, courtesy of Professor Yates, have here a copy of the Harvard Lampoon, which was its predecessor, a parody issue of Time magazine. And it looks exactly like Time. If they didn't say a Harvard Lampoon parody, you'd have no way of knowing it wasn't. And, there's all sorts of things, but I thought I'd read you one. If you know Time, you know that toward the back of every issue they have a little column called Milestones, and in this small little notices of people's births, deaths, operations, illnesses, and so forth. And in this one they have a sort of parody here. Well, it is a parody, just one. It's the little title is Thide, and the parody runs: Thilas Marner was subjected to the first successful thigh transplant in medical history by a doctor who triumphantly concluded, "I finally found what I've been surgeon for, the thigh that binds." Well, my point is that that tradition of witty wordplay was carried on from the Harvard Lampoon, I think, to the National Lampoon, and probably, in my opinion, the best issue the National Lampoon has done. The parody of the high school yearbook is full of that type of quick sleight of hand, let's say verbal sleight of hand, and a kind of formal parody that is the parody of the form of the yearbook. And a lot of the things that they that they came up with in that particular issue, I notice, have been picked up and used. Are you familiar with that issue of the National Lampoon? It was a complete parody of a yearbook. Like this, you would think when you picked it up, it was a yearbook from Estes Kefauver High School, I think. They ran through all of the normal things one would find in a yearbook, senior pictures, and of course the picture. They even went to the trouble of getting a whole group of people to have haircuts. It was based on I think 1963 or 64, which was the year I graduated from high school class, and they went through various things. Well, the point I'm trying to make is that the characters who originally appeared in that have resurfaced on Saturday Night Live. The what's their name, with Gilda Radner and no, I'm thinking of the high school kids the nerds. They come right out of that. Andy Kaufman's character on Taxi is taken from a character who appears in this parody. What I'm trying to say is that it's been a continual form of humor. Ann Bates, who writes for the Saturday Night Live and who is going to appear here on Sunday, a review of one of her performances said that it was sophomoric enough even for freshmen. And to my mind, it strikes me as the best and worst of that kind of humor. The most recent issue of the National Lampoon I found very disappointing and almost almost like Mad Magazine. Shall we try to characterize Mad Magazine's humor?
Mad, as far as I can see, has not really grown since the 60s. It was fresh and funny at their takeoffs on other comic strips, which is originally, I guess, how it started, on Little Fanny Rooney and characters like that. But I find that I can only read Mad with a great effort now. Either I've become sane or mad. It's hard to say which. But I don't think Mad has improved. I would say it's declined.
Those of you who, well, most of you are, who live here in Ames or have something to do with Iowa State might be interested in knowing that we have a collection in the library of EC comic books, which were written in the early 50s by a man whose name escapes me, but the same man, frustrated at not being able to sell these comics, then went off and founded Mad Magazine. So as you say, the Mad, I do think, draws from its comic background. At any rate, if you're interested in these comics, they're in the special collections section of the library.
Professor Berger mentioned Monocle, which is one little magazine I'm not familiar with, but for a number of years, the University of Illinois had a humorous magazine. So did the University of Wisconsin, and I don't doubt there are many other college humor magazines that at least gave future writers a good deal of training. It's got scattered now in library files all over the country.
My question is then, is there a chance for the New Yorker to continue as a magazine in light of the growing popularity of sophomoric humor? Is there still a market for the urbane?
As far as I know, their circulation has remained pretty stable at about 500,000 for a number of years. And that would be the only answer that I have, that the cartoons continue to be consistently top quality, and they seem to come up with writers who have like Judith Rasko, who have had experience in the more fragile magazines and media, and Penelope Gilliatt. I would say they're probably likely to hold their own pretty well.
Of course, they owe a good deal of their popularity to non-humorous interests.
So they attracted, as young writers, they got Truman Capote, they got John Updike. They seem to have no difficulty at getting talent to write for them.
John Updike, also an ex-Harvard Lampoon writer. Yes. Also, I should mention that they also, I wanted to say this, my own interest is in sports. I wanted to say that they have an excellent tradition of people writing about sports in the New Yorker. A.J. Liebling wrote about boxing. So it's some of the best sports writing, and the current person carrying on that tradition, I think, is Roger Angell, the son of a former editor, stepson of E.B. White, who is currently, because of the rather well-popularized, shall I say, disaster in the magazine, is now doing their movie reviews, but who basically writes baseball things, as well as he's a senior fiction editor. And it's, to my mind, some of the best writing on any subject in the country. It appears about 3 times a year in one of these long feature articles that you mentioned. So the tradition of sports and humor being linked in a magazine is still going on, as well as they have regular columns on the racetrack, which interests me not at all, and on Ivy League football, which I can't imagine interests anybody anymore, even Ivy Leaguers.
Their racetrack man died recently. I've forgotten his name, but he wrote as Audax Minor
Right.
since almost the whole life of the magazine.
Are they going to continue?
I don't know.
Well, have we anything more to say?
Well, Steve, I have no way of rising to a climax, so the next best thing is an anticlimax, and to say that the formal, more or less, part of our presentation is through, and the mics are open.
How do you explain, when I was younger, practically every college had its own college humor magazine? Well, that is not true anymore. Why has that died out? Even when I came to Iowa State pre-Civil War, they had their green gander here, which used to upset some of the proper people on campus. But every campus, it seemed to me, had a college humor magazine. I don't think that's true anymore.
I would make one guess that there are fewer writers on any campus at any given time. There are fewer people oriented toward producing or writing magazines of humor. They're more, and their audiences are more oriented toward film and television, and that's where the talent goes. That's where it's directed. Would be my guess. What you say reminds me of one of the origins of my interest in humor was the 1921 and 1922 Beaver, which is the yearbook of what was then Oregon Agricultural College, which my father had, and they had a humorous section. I suspect that almost every college that didn't publish a magazine had a humor section in its yearbook. I know that my mother had preserved her copies from when she was at Morningside, and they had a humorous section. And some of the humor wasn't so different from what it is now. I recall in the 1922 Beaver about how the engineers, they have no fears, they live in caves and ditches, they write their notes in blood and wipe their pens upon their breeches. It goes on to portray the macho image of the engineer. I hope the laugh disguises the fact that I didn't really answer your question.
Perhaps you and Jim could tell me, was the Green Gander as racy as the older kids used to tell me? And when did it start and why did it stop? With this Green Gander room in the Gateway, it's made people conscious that there was a magazine, and I suppose a lot of Iowa State kids never knew they had one.
Some faculty members, me included, didn't know they had one.
I think it started right after World War I. At least I know it was an operation then after World War I, because Professor Marvin, who's still alive, was one of the editors of the Green Gander. He has regaled me with tales about being threatened about being run out down on a rail for some of the things that were put in the Green Gander. I know he served in World War I and came back to Iowa State. And I came here in 1946, and it was in operation, I think, about 3 or 4 years after we came here, and then it just died. For what reason? But, and it had some outrageous stuff in it, usually sexual implications primarily. I found it occasionally irritating, frankly. It was outrageous, upset. But it wasn't censored. I mean, they didn't. The administration didn't squash it.
Yeah, a few times you mentioned the good quality of the cartoons in the New Yorker. I'm a foreign student, so it's difficult to judge for me. But as you as two distinguished professors of humor, and that's give me a solution. But I think that the cartoons in New York are made for the old lady in Dubuque. What they do all the time is they have the joke in the drawing, then they have a sentence, 2 lines or 3 lines under the joke, which explains the joke. And sometimes even they underline some words to make it clear to you. What I get from New York is that people who read the jokes are not very intelligent people.
I think that's an excellent comment, and suggests a certain inconsistency between theory and practice on the part of the New Yorker. And their cartoons are widely reprinted in with presumably for fee, because they're all strictly copyrighted, in textbooks, including high school textbooks.
You also point to the fact that it is formulaic. They always they pride themselves on having the one-line cartoon. You never have a long explanation of what's going on in the cartoon. You may get a long sentence or two, but it's not a dialogue of any sort.
The Marxist-oriented Art Young, claims to have invented the one-liner before the New Yorker, but the New Yorker certainly picked up on it.
Did you have a rejoinder? Did you want to say something to that? Did you want to answer me? You looked displeased with what I said.
Just remember that the only cartoon without a title, without a line, was about Iowa. It's quite difficult for me to describe now the cartoon, but it was something like what you saw was a barn and a field of corn, and the Department of Tourism in Iowa had a little sign by every row of corn. On the sign you can like to read, "This is corn."
Is there any way to show that maybe coming from Europe, I assume, maybe the cartoons are more sophisticated, the line cartoons are more subtle, maybe not? Do you have any notion if that's true?
I don't, what's your impression? Are European cartoons more sophisticated? My impression is
No,
not.
we always talk about English humor. In English humor, we think that's the tongue-in-cheek humor. But I think it was Orwell who mentioned that the really English humor is more a fat lady on the beach who's bitten in her big, what do you say, in her throat,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, by a big sea animal or something like that. He said that's real English humor, not the sophisticated statements. What we think is English humor. He said that's not true. And indeed, when you go to England and you buy postcards there, or you look at Punch magazine, you see those fat ladies on the beach who are and I don't see the difference between those drawings and the drawings in New York or something.
Well, we're talking about a very subjective thing. On the whole, and from my very brief, sketchy dippings into Punch, I get the impression that they tend to have more lines under their cartoons, that the New Yorker captions tend to be briefer and more concise. One Punch cartoon I remember shows a typical be-mustached British tourist at the desk of a hotel, and the caption is, the hotel clerk is holding out some postcards, and the caption is, "Here are some views of our hotel that you might like to take with you, sir." And "Thanks, but I have my own views of your hotel." Now that would never, the caption is too wordy, that would never make the New Yorker. Now I suppose, so having said never, I'd immediately better retract that.
I was thinking in Atlas magazine, the World Press magazine, they have a page often of cartoons, a lot of times from around the world. And a lot of times there isn't much caption that goes with them, but of course, I don't know how they're edited or picked, so maybe they pick the ones that they think American people could get, or the United States, I don't know.
What I suspect is that graphic humor is becoming more and more internationalized, that the influence of Punch and the New Yorker and of the German grotesque tradition have gone around the world and thoroughly permeated each other and gotten into other countries. That there really is, the cross currents of influence are very active, and so there's been mutual influence all the way around.
Well, we've already gone 55 minutes and we're in danger of creeping up on Brendan Gill's hour. So if there are no other questions, we thank you for your attendance.